Good to see you.
How are you?
Tired.
Are you
And it's hot in London and there is no air conditioning.
Are you in London or in your city right now?
No, I'm in London. I'm in London because it's the end of the term and we have, well, actually, it was in Vienna early this week for the final exams in Vienna.
Okay, great.
And next week there are finals in London, so just to be here.
Thanks a lot for your participants. Give us this lecture. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you. Can you hear me well? Because
yes.
I have a microphone here, which only works well if I keep it very close to.
It sounds great.
Is the voice?
Yeah, super.
Good. And then I will need to share the screen and show my PowerPoint.
Yes.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Stop one. Oh, it's probably this one. Share. Do you see my PowerPoint?
Actually, it's a blank page, right?
It's a blank page, but this is how it should be. So let's see. Next, do you see something now?
Yes.
Good. Should I go full screen or do you have it already full screen?
I have an introduction because normally the students will be late. So I will make like a 5 to 10 minutes introduction before your lecture.
No, but wait, do you see the full screen?
I see, no, not sharing right now. It's just a blank page. Okay, now, this is a full screen.
A full blank page, and this is my first slide, right?
Good. Super.
Good. All right. So you tell me when you're ready to go. And you introduce. How many students do you have?
We have formally like 15 Tongji PhD students. They take these courses. So they need to turn in essay papers for the credits. And we also open to the other PhD candidates, not in Tongji, but the other universities. So they participate, engage into the discussion.
But is someone in a physical room or you're all online?
No. It's all online. It's an online.
Online.
Yeah. It's an online course. It's a great honor to have the representative theorist, I think, who gave a fabulous discussion. I think last few days, like Archimangus make a super impressive lecture, and the last night we have Anthony Picon, who also make
good friend of mine.
and also mentioned your theory. I think and topic today you put forward is very interesting. I think I'm looking forward to have good question because we have New Leach gave a lecture series, and last night Professor Picon gave some different, totally different, different critical thinking to Neil's opinion. I think it's kind of discussion, but it's good to make different discussion when we
are all different. So.
It's good to be different.
Did Antoine talk about artificial intelligence? It's not really his cup of tea, right? What did he talk about?
Picon tell us about the materiality.
Yes, that's his topic.
Yeah, that's his common. I think it's a common point from his idea. So he mentioned artificial intelligence would be some meaningful generative process pointing to the materiality of architecture. So he is putting forward some different opinion and different.
But his last book is on materiality, and so I think this is where it's coming from.
Exactly. It's good to be different. I think totally.
No matter what we have been doing. As of the last, 12 months, we all have to take into account the problem of AI because it's going everywhere. And so no matter what you do, if you're a plumber, if you grow tomatoes, if you are a hairdresser, you have to deal with it.
Great.
So we all do.
So Mario, would you possible to click the sharing firstly? I will make a brief introduction.
So I stop the share.
And stop sharing. Yes,
Good.
I will share my screen because the students always late. So I mean,
that's everywhere.
Okay. Starting. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, all the students and also the participants of Digital Futures. Welcome back. So first, I would like to briefly introduce this PhD consortium and waiting for the students, all the participants coming in this 10 minutes. And we have actually the morning sessions and the evening sessions. And the morning sessions, 6 lectures, all by Neil Leach. He actually makes some discussion on the camouflage revisit, which based on one of his formal books published by MIT Press. And also he adding something, some new thinking and new introduction of artificial intelligence, which actually he focused and over the past few years. I think it's interesting discussions from news lectures. And then the evening session, we invited 6 different lectures. So we already have Andrew Witt from Harvard GSD, Shichao Li from UVA, Alejandro Zarabolo from AZP ML, and also Archimangus from ICD Stuttgart. And last night we have Anthony Picon from Harvard GSD. Tonight it's a great honor to invite Professor Mario Carpo, who is the most representative architecture theorist, especially in digital and architecture intelligence. Is kind of theoretical research. So it's a great honor to have Mario coming tonight. And also we have around 15 Tongji student, PhD student. Actually, you take these courses, and we need to have some assessment, including the class attendance, class performance, and also we have a final review on your paper, 2,000 words paper. So take these credits. So please turn in your paper before July the 3rd, 2023. And actually this lecture series, PhD Consortium, is based on the platform of Architecture Digital Futures. And we try to establish the sharing educational content and accessible for everyone across the world. So this is the 13th year, actually, we organize this event. And growing as a digital platform, Digital Futures aim to promote international collaborations about a broad range of contemporary issues in the discipline of architecture and associated fields, with a particular emphasis on the latest computational design and fabrication, as well as we're sharing the broad ethical and social issues such as environmental concerns within our ever-evolving and highly technological culture. So welcome, participate all these special events. And this is all the global participants over the past 13 years. We actually have advisors, students, architects who educate and learning, sharing on this platform around the world. So this is this year, actually, we have some different branch hubs organize different digital future events. In Shanghai, we have 23 offline workshops and 5 online workshops, as well as Neil Leach, who organized some international workshops, around 30 online workshops all over the world by the end of July. So totally, we will have 70 to 80 workshops this year. So that's a big number. And last year, actually, we launched a journal based on Digital Future platform, and we're lucky to have a commentary essay from Mario Carpo in the first issue. And we try to make some discussion focusing on 3 future scenarios, including smart habitat, virtual habitat, and spatial habitat. And also we try to attract all the research teams from all the PhD programs around the world, maybe especially the PhD students could introduce their scientific research and also philosophy papers on the life cycle, whole life cycle, including design, simulation, optimization, construction, operation, so on and so forth. And also this is a cross-discipline platform, publishing platform, including architecture discipline, and including civil engineer and environmental engineer, computer science, robotic science, social science, so on and so forth. So welcome to have your publications to this platform. And also, I would also like to send invitation to Mario, if you can give us a special paper on tonight's lecture, maybe a short, into 2,000 words, I think would be appreciated to.
We can work on that.
Yes, and also the invitation. I think the topic is super interesting tonight. And then I would like to introduce Professor Mario Carpo, although all of you know his name. He is a Rainer Banham professor in UCL, and special focus on the history and theory, Bartlett University College, London, who is a professor of architecture theory, and also he teach in University of Applied Arts in Vienna as well. Looking forward, maybe in the near future, we can invite Mario offline, coming to Shanghai and teach in Tongji in the near future. We'll try to establish that. Mario Carpo's research and publications focus on relationships among architectural theory, cultural history, and the history of media and design technologies. His Architecture in the Age of Printing, which published in 2001, has been translated into several languages. His most recent book, Beyond Digital, Design and Automation at the End of Modernity, which published this year, 2023. We're looking forward to read it recently. And also another very famous book, The Second Digital Turn, Design Beyond Intelligence, which published in 2017. And another famous book, The Alphabet and the Algorithm, which published in 2011, and which all published by MIT Press. So tonight, Mario will give us a very interesting topic on the new humanism of artificial intelligence. I think over the past few days, we make a lot discussion on the intelligence, architectural intelligence, and different professors actually have their different standpoint. So we're looking forward to give the screen to Mario to give us the lecture. So thank you, Mario.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the introduction. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Now I take the screen to share my PowerPoint. And let's see. Ideally, you should see a blank screen, right? This is my first slide. Absolutely right. Yes, this is where we start. Thank you. So you already gave me my title, and the story I'm going to tell you, it's a very long story, which started a long time ago in antiquity. Well, I'm referring to the Western European classical antiquity, but you will see that some of the stuff that I am going to discuss, taken from this European legacy, probably has to be evaluated and seen in the context of an extra-European, non-European, non-Eurocentric context. However, let's start with what we call the ancients, which in the traditional Eurocentric view of the world means Greek and Roman classical antiquity. This is where European civilization started a long time ago. And these ancients, the Greek and the Roman, Plato, Aristotle, these people, they did not have theories on what we now call the fine arts. They didn't have even a notion of fine arts. For them, arts meant craft. But this is a long story, where we, the moderns, formulated sophisticated aesthetic principles on the modes and functions of imitation, invention, and creation in painting, sculpture, and architecture. The ancient Greek, they only had some fancy tales, anecdotes, myths, topoi, parables, stories, storytelling, stories telling how some craftsmen, on some occasions, managed to make stuff that looked natural, that looked as if made by nature. And they had, oops, why is my next slide not coming? There it is. They had one term to define in ancient Greek, the imitation of nature. They call it mimesis, which in English is pronounced mimesis. As you see from Wikipedia, my source, in ancient Greek, term used to simply means the imitation of nature. And what they meant by imitation of nature simply meant the imitation of nature. For example, a painted apple should look like a real apple. This is the principle of the imitation of nature as they conceived it 25 centuries ago. And we know, for example, that a famous Greek painter called Zeuxis once painted grapes that were so, where is it? Yes, that's him. So lifelike that birds came down to peck at them. You see here on the screen, I cannot enlarge, but you can see my arrow. This is Zeuxis, the painter. This is the painting he painted, grapes. And the grapes are so realistic that even the birds are cheated, and they try to flock to this canvas, to the painting, to eat the grapes. And of course, the grapes are painted, so the birds end up breaking their beak onto the painting because it's not real, it's painted. But the skill of the painter was to make things that look as if they were real, as if they were alive. Even the birds were cheated. Then another famous Greek painter called Apelles, he painted a horse that was so perfect that the image fooled even other horses. Just here, the grapes are cheating the birds. Apelles painted a horse, and another horse passing nearby see the painted horse and thinks that the painted horse is a real horse. This was the golden standard of a well-made painting. It looked as if it were true, as if it were real, as if it were alive. Now, the great rival of Zeuxis was called Parrhasius, once won the first prize in a painter's competition by drawing a curtain that Zeuxis himself was tricked into attempting to pull aside, on which occasion, there you go, on which occasion Zeuxis admitted defeat and came in second. Here you have, it's the picture. Can I enlarge it? No, I can't. There's a picture at the bottom, and you see the two painters competing. On one side, there is the painting of the grapes and all the birds that are flocking to try to eat the painted grapes, and they cannot eat them because they are not real, they are painted. But on the opposite side, there is the competition entry by Parrhasius. Parrhasius has painted this curtain. And so, first, Zeuxis show the grapes and say, you see, my grapes are so well painted that even the birds are being fooled. They try to eat them. And you, Parrhasius, what did you paint on the other side? Parrhasius say, well, I painted, it's behind the curtain. Come and have a look. And Zeuxis goes and tries to pull the curtain, and surprise, surprise, the curtain is painted. It's not real. So the argument was, you, Zeuxis, you cheated the birds, but I, Parrhasius, I cheated you. So who is the best painter? And Zeuxis said, well, I have to admit, in this case, you were better than me, because I cheated the birds, which are not particularly smart, but you cheated me, so you win the first prize. This is what they meant by imitation of nature, realism, mimesis, spelled M-I-M-E-S-I-S, imitation of nature in the classical tradition. The closer to nature it is, the better it is. The purpose of the painter is to be as realistic as possible. Now, the same Zeuxis, the one who painted the grapes, also figures in another quite different story. He had been invited to a town in what would now be the south of Italy. Italy, of course, didn't exist at the time as a country, but the land was already there, and it was called Magna Graecia at the time. And he was invited to paint a picture of a goddess. I don't remember which goddess, which Greek goddess it would have been, but it was supposed to be a female divinity of extraordinary beauty. So the task of Zeuxis was to paint an extraordinarily good-looking woman. So in order to make this picture, in search of inspiration, when he arrived to this town called Croton, he asked the local counselors to see some examples of local good-looking women, because he needed a model to make the painting. After a while, he was allowed to see some local girls. It took some negotiations. But this is the thing. He did not find any of them quite to his taste. So what did he do? He chose not one model, but 5. He retained 5 girls as models. His painting was a fusion, a blend, an assemblage of features taken from all 5. And it met with great success, hence the lasting popularity of the anecdote, which was repeated and rehashed and commented upon for centuries, till the 19th century. And of course, pages and pages were written on it, and many paintings were made illustrating Zeuxis' trick, which you see here in this engraving from the 17th century German, this Joachim von Sandrart, never mind. And you see the painter making his painting, drawing his inspiration from the imitation of not one model, but 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He assembled 5 models to make one painting. And you see the same topic here. It's the Renaissance. This is Vasari, a great friend of Michelangelo, illustrating the same topic. Here we don't see 5 girls. I see only 3 of them. I don't know where the other 2 are, but the painter is making one painting out of many models, 3, 5, etc. And the topic was extremely popular throughout the Renaissance. It became even more popular in the 19th century, Victorian age. The chosen 5, Zeuxis at Crotona. This is Edwin Long, a British Victorian painter who became famous, made a career in America around 1890. And you see here Zeuxis and the 5 models, and the painter is making one image out of 5 models. This is another late 19th century painter. This one is Eleuterio Pagliano, Italian. The topic is the same. This is Zeuxis. He collected, he assembled his 5 models, and he is imitating the 5 of them at the same time. Now, a few months ago, I wrote a short article telling this story, similar to the story I'm going to tell you later today, for an American publication, and we had to choose images to illustrate the story of Zeuxis. And I suggested this one and this one and a few others from the classical tradition. And then we decided that it was probably not a good idea to publish them, because seen from today's vantage point, there is something in this iconography which doesn't seem right. This is, in today's term, a very sexist view, because there is only one painter who is the man, and there are 5 models who are female. And as you may notice, the painter is fully dressed, the 5 girls are half naked. So today we wouldn't do that, because today this would really not look good. This is a kind of stuff which perhaps in the 19th century was okay, but today we don't do this. And if you think that this view of art is a bit sexist, well, we are not the first one to find that out, because there is one precedent. I don't know if you know the name of Angelika Kaufman. She's a classical painter from the late 18th century, at a time where painters were all male. But there is an exception. There were perhaps a couple of exceptions in the history of classicism. There was, well, Angelika Kaufman is the most famous. She was a genius, a miracle of nature, born in a small village in Switzerland, grew up in a small village in Austria, but at the age of 18, she was already famous as a portrait maker. She spoke 5 languages. She went to Rome. She became a celebrity. Then she went to London, where she made a lot of money making paintings. She was inducted in the Royal Society, the only woman probably for centuries. And soon enough, she made this illustration of the topos of Zeuxis and the 5 models. But there is a tweak, because this is the story seen by a painter who was a woman, not a man. And as you may notice, there are only 4 models here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, sorry, go back. And the 5th model is here, but she is not being imitated by the painter, because the girl number 5, she's actually taking a brush, which is the instrument of the painter. So she's stealing the painter's job. And as it happens, this girl is a self-portrait of Angelika Kaufman herself, age 28 or 30. So this is a feminist view of topos of Zeuxis' story, seen by a painter who happens to be a female. She doesn't want to be a model. She's not naked. She's fully dressed. She's taken a brush, and she wants to steal the job of the painter. She wants to be a painter herself. So you see that if we notice that this view of the story is a bit sexist, already in the 18th century, that was kind of evident. But at any rate, let's go ahead with the story and forget about the way it was interpreted. Let's go back to what it meant when the story was written and in the Renaissance. From the point of view of art theory, and even of the theory of human knowledge, this tale conceals a number of major theoretical problems. Problem number 1, imagine this. If Zeuxis, the painter, already had an idea of feminine beauty in his mind, why did he need to imitate any model? He already knew he didn't need a model. And if, on the contrary, he did not have a model, an idea in his mind, how could he choose among the 5 models? It's incompatible. So both solutions don't make sense. With some reason, because this is the conflict between realism, you copy things as they are, and idealism, you reproduce things which you can imagine in your mind. And the conflict between realism and idealism in the arts has found different solutions throughout the ages. But problem number 2, from a more practical point of view, the technicalities of Zeuxis' mode of artistic operation, the selection and the reassembly of parts coming from many models. This process prompted a never-ending stream of theories and speculations. Evidently, the artist would not have limited himself in that instance to just cutting and pasting a number of pieces, as in a puzzle. He would most likely have had to rework, modify, and adapt some of the parts, not only to chip off the edges, but also more generally, to make them blend with one another and merge all the different fragments and parts into a single harmonious composition. Hence the question, how much of Zeuxis' operation was what today we would call a collage, putting the pieces together, or how much of it would have been some more creative form of imitation, the work of a talented artist, only vaguely inspired by some of his models or sources. Could people look at the finished painting and tell, see, these are the eyes of model number 1, and this is the nose of model number 2, and these are the lips of model number 3? Or did he blend, the painter, I mean, all his sources in one transfigured, almost supernatural composition, where one would say, see, there is a certain something in this portrait that reminds me of model 1 and of model 2 and of model 3, but I cannot tell what precisely comes from each. In classical art theory, this would have been seen as the best way, because that's the way nature itself works. For example, that's the way children may look like one or the other, or both, their biological parents. Another metaphor, which was frequently invoked in the past, was that of the bee, the little fly, the bee, which makes honey by picking the pollen of many flowers. But pollen is transformed by the bee's industry. So in the end, the honey we get out of the beehive doesn't show any trace of the sources from which it derives. All the ingredients, the pollen, have been transfigured by the bee's work, by the bee's labor, by the bee's creative process. This, according to classical theory, is what creative artists do. Creative artists absorb, transform, and transfigure their sources, make something new out of them, where the new whole is better than any of the original parts. This is what the ancients call creative imitation, the terms you see on the screen. Imitation that creates something new, and at the same time, a new creation that imitates something old. These classical principles acquired a new urgency during the Renaissance, an entire civilization that aimed at the revival of the classical world, a revival to be obtained by way of an intelligent or creative imitation of the classical past. Imitation was the core paradigm of the entire totality of Renaissance culture, the foundation of all the Renaissance science and arts and life, with the exception of religion, because classical antiquity didn't offer a good example to modern Christians. Strange as it may appear today, at the time of Columbus was discovering America, 1492 in the European chronology, a humanist was a scholar specializing in the imitation of Cicero's Latin, meaning in the imitation of the way of writing of an author, Cicero, who had been dead for 15 centuries, writing in a language that nobody spoke anymore. Likewise, Renaissance architects designed buildings that had to look somewhat ancient, and their ancient look was obtained by dint of a creative imitation of classical building or what was known of them. You see here an example. This is Serlio. How do you imitate the ruin of classical antiquity? You see the statue in the middle is a metaphor of architecture. Architecture can break down all the ruins still extant for what remains of them into their parts, all their pieces. You make a catalog of parts, and then by magic, you put them together, you reassemble them, and you make a new architecture which is made of ancient parts. And since all the parts come from antiquity, really or in figuration, what you build new will look like something old. Imitation. This is the principle. Of course, here it looks a bit chunky, but then when an architect of talent like Bramante put all the pieces together, it looks smooth, harmonious, coherent. all the parts come from classical antiquity, but they are put together in a new compositional logic. This is a building which never existed in classical antiquity. He made it up. But all the parts, the columns, the capitals, the entablature, the frieze, the balcony, the dome, the pilasters, all the ingredients are old. But the new composition is new, creative imitation of the past through the reassembly of parts. And this is where Renaissance artists, here we are in Rome, around here 1500, invented a new mode, a new practice of imitation. Today we would call it imitation 2.0. Renaissance artists learned to imitate the form of an artistic model. But this is the thing, only its form without its content. For example, they started to imitate Cicero's writing while expressing new ideas that did not exist in Cicero's time. Architects imitated classical architecture while designing building types that did not even exist in classical times. This is a famous example. Leon Battista Alberti, around 1450, 1460, Sant'Andrea in Mantua. It's a church, a Christian church. And he wanted to build a Christian church imitating classical antiquity because this is what Renaissance humanists did. Problem. The Christian religion did not exist in classical antiquity, so churches did not exist at the time of Cicero because Christianism had not yet been invented. So how do you invent a building type, a Christian church imitating classical antiquity, since in classical antiquity churches did not exist? Well, Alberti here tried to make a cut and paste collage because the pediment of the top comes from a Greek temple, which was a sacred building, but not a church because the religion was different. And the rest is not a Greek temple, it's a Roman triumphal arch. So he put together a Roman model, a Greek model, cut and paste, a collage, and it does look a bit chunky because these are ingredients coming from two different traditions. One comes from Greece, one comes from Rome. They're both ancient, so the building looks somewhat ancient, but you can tell that it is not a particularly successful example of imitation because the pieces are put together in a way which is not smooth, which is not homogeneous. This is a collage, it's not a merger. Now, this new mode of imitation, imitation of style, meaning imitation of form without content, became explicitly what I would say called the transference or the transportation, if you like, or the migration of form through different contents. They didn't have a word to describe this new operation at the time until Vasari, the guy who made the painting we have seen 10 minutes ago, Michelangelo's friend, he found a name to evoke this quintessence, something infused into and common to very different artworks, something which could be transferred from artwork 1 to artwork 2, different but having something in common. And he called it a manner, M-A-N-N-E-R, manner. Manner is a certain something that different works of art have in common. It's a feeling, a flair, a generic, pervasive, diffuse, but undefinable aura. Now, in the 18th century, the term taste was often used with similar meanings. And as of the 19th century, the term style took over. That's the term we still use today. And then, as of the 19th century, this term style replaced all others. It was not a new term because it was first used by Cicero himself, meaning a long time ago with exactly the same meaning, but for some bizarre reason, Cicero's term, which was known and occasionally used in the Renaissance, did not gain currency in modern languages, English, French, Italian, German, Spanish, etc., until much later. So there you go. As of the 19th century, in European art, manner, taste, style is a term used to define a look, an aura, but different works of art have in common. It's a certain something, an undefinable something, but different works of art have in common. You see, 1, 2, and 3 were different, and they have something in common. What is it? It's not a part, it's not a color, it's not a discrete component, it's a generic flair, a feeling, and we call it a style. They are different, but they are in the same style. In this sense, with these meanings, imitation and style were in the 19th century the backbone of academic training in the arts. This is what artists learned when they went to school. This is what they specialized in, academic artists, artists in the academies of art, 19th century, that's model. Imitation and style, imitation of the works of the masters, scholarly mastery of the style of an age or of the style of a country. That's the core of the classical tradition in the visual arts, including in the arts of design. That was the foundation of modern art history, imitation and style. And in architecture, the term became prominent through the work of mostly German art historians. You may have heard the name of Gottfried Semper, who around 1860 wrote this hugely influential book, The Style in Technical and Tectonical Arts. And a few years later, still in Vienna, Alois Riegel, Stilfragen, which means problems of style, foundation of a history of ornament. And it all started early in the 19th century, still in Germany, with this treatise by Heinrich Hubsch. The title translates, "In what style should we build?" And if you know the history of German art, you will understand that Mr. Hubsch thought that they should build in a Gothic style, not in a classical style, because he chose Gothic fonts for the title of his book. The history, now, I do not need to tell you that this idea of style and imitation is exactly what modernism canceled and thoroughly eliminated from the visual arts and from the arts of design in the 20th century. This was the 19th century. Style was the heart of the education of all artists, imitation and style. And then comes modernism, and style all of a sudden becomes almost a forbidden word, something that the modernist architect, not the modern architect, the modernist architect should not do. There are many reasons why modernist artists, designers in particular, felt averse to the ideas of imitation and styles that had dominated 19th century European art theory. Now, if you're a modernist, imagine you are at Bauhaus in 1932, if you believe that form follows functions, but if form follows function, the imitation of traditional forms can be wasteful mistake or even worse. Because you imitate a form in the absence of a function which had originally justified it. Unrelated, but often complementary, the romantic artist doesn't follow precedent or nature. Visionary geniuses in the style of Howard Rourke, for example, I don't know if you know the story. There you go. They just think and create out of nothing, do their unique vision and genius. This is, Gary Cooper impersonating Howard Rourke, the protagonist of a famous, actually notorious book by Ayn Rand, The Fountainhead. You may know the story. You can read the book. I would suggest you don't do it, but you may have a look at the movie. And this is, the typical visionary. This kind of architects, they wouldn't, have an interest for imitation and style, because each one of them is a single visionary, unique genius. They do not follow precedent. They do not follow nature. They invent everything anew every day. That's, the myth. Yet the founding fathers of architectural modernism did not eliminate the notion of style altogether. Le Corbusier, for example, aimed at creating a new architectural style, his own. And in 1932, in America, modernism itself became a style, the international style, in the interpretation of Philip Johnson and Russell Hitchcock. And overall, all-out crusade against style seems to have been an ideological project of late modernist extremists, and it came to a climax in the 70s and in the 80s. This is when all imitation came to be seen as identical copy, plagiarism, larceny, almost a crime. These were when art theory and literary criticism had to bring in a number of synonyms, circumlocutions, euphemism to refer to the same, now unmentionable, notional fields. So we cannot talk about imitation, but we talk about inspiration. We talk about influence, as in this famous book by Harold Bloom, 1973. Or we talk about sensibility, inclination, affinity. If you think of it, all these words mean style. But modernists don't like style, so they don't want to use that term. And so they bring in a number of words, but it's a trick. We are cheating. It's a way to discuss style without mentioning it. But the history of the elimination of the ideas of imitation and style from modernist art theory in the 20th century is a fascinating one. And it does admit a few exceptions. First of all, a different mode of imitation based not on merger, fusion, and transfiguration, but on collage, cut and paste, chunky aggregation, existed as an alternative to the dominant style of smooth merger and transfiguration from the very start, from the Renaissance. This is Michelangelo, late Michelangelo. And this idea of collage and cut and paste and citation was taken over and reconceptualized by modernist art theory in the 20th century. Collage, was a battle cry of Picasso or Braque. This is Jew and Greece. In architecture, the same topic was taken over by deconstructivism. This is chunky enough. This is Peter Eisenman. And then by postmodernism, which is, pretty chunky and aggregational. This is not smooth. It's not a merger. It's cut and paste, assemblage and citation. And this is a story I cannot tell you today because that would take so long. So let's forget about this for the time being and focus on the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that in the late 20th century, in the theory of the visual arts and of the arts of design, imitation and style were forbidden words. Words that, if you are a good student, you should never mention, otherwise they kick you out of school. Hence, the artistic practices to which imitation and style referred just disappeared because there was no way to mention them, let alone to discuss them. There is therefore a certain irony in that the latest avatars of today's electronic technologies, artificial intelligence in particular, is fostering a revival of art theory principles. But 20th century modernism had tried to eliminate from the visual culture of a machine-made environment. This is why I'm telling you this story today. Not because I was trained as a classicist, even if I was, but because today's AI technology, GAN in particular, generative adversarial networks, and machine learning are bringing imitation and style back in practice and in theory. into the practice and theory of the visual arts. This is, for example, a blockbuster installation by Refik Anadol, which was on show at the MoMA in Manhattan from January till April. It was a screen where a merger of I don't know how many thousand works of art from the collection of the MoMA was merged in a single loop, which kept mutating and shifting from one shape to the next. And every now and then you could see briefly emerge something which was similar to one of the works of art which were used to constitute and create the data set. But as soon as you focused and said, ah, I see that, that's a Picasso. And then it merged because the loop continued and it merged with something else. It was a guess game, try and find out what was the next famous painting that would show up, but it never showed up in full. It was always a merger, a transfiguration. You know, Zeuxis made his painting out of 5 models. Refik Anadol, working with computers today, made his art out of, I don't know, 30,000 works of art from the collection of the MoMA, and he merged them all together, just like Zeuxis merged the features of the 5 girls he used as models to make his painting 25 centuries ago. Now, how is it that artificial intelligence today is bringing back some notion of imitation and style, which have been important in Western, but not only Western, art theory for many centuries, and then they were eliminated from art theory of the 20th century and modernism. How did this happen? How does it work? Well, you may know that already if you have been, playing game with GAN and generative AI in recent times, but let's just recap to see the basic principle of how this works. The revolution of machine learning reached the visual arts in the mid-2010, when a new mode of AI called generative adversarial networks, or GAN, was found to be particularly suitable to the manipulation of images. These are the 2 foundational articles. Ian Goodfellow in 2014, and the group of Leon Gatis in 2015, 2016. GAN art, or art generated by artificial intelligence, is now a recognized staple of digital art, and its image processing strategies are well known. GAN artists must first of all gather a collection of related images pertinent to the project. We call this a data set. This data set, or data set is then fed into the machine learning algorithms that ferret out, highlight, and formalize the commonalities among these images, what all these images have in common. And they do have something in common because we chose them for that purpose. The result of this inductive process is a mathematical matrix, which computer scientists call a latent space, and more or less corresponds to what philosophers would call the definition, the idea, the formula of the original data set. So, for example, if the data set is composed of images of dogs, and this is, don't laugh, it's the Stanford University dogs data set, which comprises 7,000 dogs, but then subdivided, these are golden retrievers, 150 images of golden retrievers, which is a very popular kind of dog in America. If this is the data set, these are real dogs, not fake dogs, these are real dogs. The corresponding latent space is what a philosopher in the past would call the definition of a dog, meaning explain with words what a dog is, or the idea of a dog, or an ideal dog, showing the image of a perfect dog. This definition today is not verbal, not visual, but mathematical. It's a vectorial definition, it's a huge matrix with thousands and thousands of rows and lines and columns, can in turn be applied to different tasks. Once this latent space is formalized, we can use it in 3 ways. First, analytic. showing the system a new picture of a dog, evidently, since and ask, is this a dog? System will answer, 80% a dog, 20% I don't know. Second option, generative, asking the system to produce realistic images of dogs that do not exist. These are fake dogs. These are dogs created by DALL-E and based on the data set. These dogs do not exist, whereas the Stanford data set, those are real dogs. These are fake dogs. Or third possibility, combinatory, asking the system to merge two or more data sets in given proportions, producing, for example, pictures of a kind of canine animal that looks 80% dog and 20% coyote. And what you see here is the transformation of a dog towards a coyote. On the left, it's probably 90% dog. And then the second one is 60% dog. And then it looks more and more like a coyote. And so the third one is probably 50% dog and 50% coyote. And the last one is really looks like a coyote. That's 80% coyote, 20%. Style transfer, merger and combination of two different data sets. The tidal wave of generative artificial intelligence that has swept the planet since 1 year ago, approximately, has not significantly changed this conceptual framework. Text-to-image tools like Midjourney or DALL-E, they're user-friendly and they can create intelligent images out of verbal or visual prompts as if out of thin air. And their almost supernatural deeds have evidently struck a chord with the general public. Everyone is astonished. But the data sets on which they are based derive from vast troves of labeled images, text and image pairs. They say scraped from the internet, but it's a euphemism. What they mean is stolen from the internet, because the images are there and they just take them to create the data set. And so this generic data set can only reflect what the internet has already gathered. In this sense, general purpose AI tools like those I just mentioned, in a sense, only automate crowdsourcing by tapping the same collective knowledge that Wikipedia and other social media apps have been canvassing and soliciting for the last 20 years. Given this context, the almost miraculous images now served on demand by generative AI tools may be of some use to sociologists or to advertising executives, trying to find out, for example, the picture that best illustrates a certain notion in the mind of most people. But this kind of images, based on the current state of the art, are only of limited interest to visual artists or designers like us. For example, this is what I get out of DALL-E if I ask, what does Switzerland look like? These are a generic, idealized view of Switzerland. This landscape doesn't exist anywhere. But due to the way that DALL-E works by aggregating the wisdom of crowds, this is, in a sense, an opinion poll. Think of it as a visual opinion poll. This is what most people would have in mind as an image if you ask them, what does Switzerland look like? And by aggregating the wisdom of crowds, which is already, out there on the internet, this is what statistically we get by aggregating and merging and synthesizing a visual rendition or rendering of the wisdom of crowds. Now, there are cases where this kind of opinion poll may be useful. So assuming you are in advertising and you want to, find an image for a new tablet of Swiss chocolate, this idea, it may be useful for you to know what most people think that Switzerland looks like, because this is what DALL-E gets back to you. This is an opinion poll. What do most people think that Switzerland looks like? If you ask to most people, what image comes to your mind if I tell you Switzerland, and you make a statistical average of all the answers and you translate that into a picture, this is what you get. This is what most people see as Switzerland. If you are into advertising, This is probably an interesting device. If you are a designer, this serves nothing. So for our profession, this is just a video game of no practical purpose. All the same, the potential of a technology that one day may deliver automated, customized, and controllable images from any combination of verbal queries, prompts, or visual inputs did not fail to register with the design community, because we are all impressed, eliciting, as could be expected, the latest resurgence of a human versus machine diatribe. Creativity, can a machine be creative, etc., etc. We have been discussing that since the beginning of times, so nobody knows the answer. These elevated preoccupation and conceits have hidden from sight some very practical consequences of the rise of AI-generated images, which are already being felt in the design professions and in academia. Machine learning tools based on legacy GANs or on the more recent diffusion models at the basis of DALL-E's, stunts, are attuning us to the logic whereby today's artificial intelligence processes and creates images, and inducing us to deal with images in similar ways. And this begs the question, how does AI work with images? Under the bonnet, if you want to look at the nuts and bolts. Well, this is the important thing. AI-based image making is, at its core, a double exercise in similarities. What is similar and what is not? The first part of the GAN process, as I described it, is analytic. It is about detecting similarities. In the example mentioned above, what do all these carefully selected images of dogs have in common? Well, they're all golden retrievers, but which visual feature make a dog, or a golden retriever, special kind of dog? This inductive process will create the image of an archetypal dog, the ideal dog. Never mind what computer scientists call it. They probably call it the latent space of a dog. The second part of the process is not analytic, but generative. How many variations can we introduce in the image of this ideal dog? So it will be different from its archetype, yet still recognizable as a dog, insofar as it is similar to all the dogs known to the system. The second part of the process, the generative part, is what literally we should call imitation, because this is the way it was called in the past. Here, the system, the computer, artificial intelligence, is imitating its own archetypal dog, inventing fake dogs, which are different from, but similar to the archetypal dog, which has been created in the latent space. If they are too different, they're no longer dogs. If they are different within limits, they are still recognized as variations of the idea of dogs. This is how we create fake dogs. Next step, if we want to imitate two different data sets at the same time, to create a hybrid out of two different corpora of images, what is it that we can transfer from one image to another, losing some and keeping other of its distinctive features? How do we call that spirit, that aura, the flavor that characterize the original data set? What's that common feeling that all these images had in common? Can be transferred to other content while still being recognizable as a trace or emanation of the original corpus, as when I combine the dog and the coyote. In the past, as we have seen, we used to call this a style. And in fact, the computer scientists that created GAN in 2015, 2016, started called this operation style transfer. The term has stuck, and it is now embedded in some of the most popular GAN and text-to-image application. See, choose base image, then choose style image. So image number one, you choose it, it's the base, and it is transformed based on the style you choose in step 2. Step 3, you generate a transformation of the original image based on the style you have chosen in the second step. So for example, I chose, to avoid speaking of dogs all the time, I chose a cat this time, choose base image. Cat is a real cat, by the way. His name is Robin. I know him well, he's a good cat. So choose image number 1, cat, it's Robin. Choose style image. In which style do you want to transform the image of that real cat? I chose Mondrian, neoplasticism. Combine base image and style image. What you get is Robin as if he had been painted by Mondrian. So it is a picture of Robin, content in the style of Mondrian art. The technical, so the technical resurrection of the term imitation, as opposed to style, is more recent. Although imitation learning has long been a recognized branch of artificial intelligence, the term itself gained recognition only in a seminal research paper published by Google DeepMind a few months ago, January 2023, where the implications of imitation learning are extended way beyond the ambit of style and applied to knowledge transfer as a whole. Regardless of terminology, visual imitation is what AI-based image-making technologies basically do. And so do we when we use them. You take, well, you already seen it before, this is Michelangelo, and these are endless random variation. I didn't choose any style. I just asked DALL-E to just keep creating random variation based on whatever random association with its data set it came up with. So they're similar to the original, but with unpredictable variations. Because I didn't choose any prompt, just random variation can go on forever. This notion of imitation is what humans appears to have almost always have been doing. So it comes as no surprise that engineers trying to replicate with mathematical means some operation of human mind felt at some point the instrumental need to call on, resurrect, and revive these two ancient terms, imitation and styles. What computer scientists probably didn't know when they came up with these terms is that these two terms have been out of currency for most of the 20th century, and that artists and theoreticians trained in the second half of the last century, in particular, and to this day, have either avoided them or actively tried to cancel them. So this is the paradox. AI is bringing back to art practice, if not yet to art theory, notions of imitation and style, but modernist ideology had banned from the theory and practice of the visual arts throughout most of the 20th century, and almost to this day. Imitation and style, which modernist ideology had kicked out of art theory through the door, are coming back to art practice through the window of technology. The problem is that as imitation and styles have been absent from all discourses on the visual arts for 2 generations at least, we are all now collectively, but particularly in the Eurocentric modernist West, a bit out of practice. And we don't know how to deal with this unexpected revival of some ancestral visual strategies. Classical theoreticians, then classicists of all sorts, they knew full well that all creation necessarily includes some awareness, if not acknowledgement of precedent. But all invention is predicated on some form of assimilation, or indeed imitation of earlier findings. And this includes repudiation, which is imitation in reverse. Out of this realization came over time an entire encyclopedia of aesthetic and cognitive theories aimed at honing and promoting the best practices of imitation. And why the art historical theories I mentioned all originate from within the classical European tradition, from Renaissance humanism, that celebrated imitation, to industrial modernism, that rejected it. Today's image-making technologies do not know any such cultural border, and they are being largely and often enthusiastically adopted, if not outright developed, in countries that were not colonized by Europe, nor otherwise exposed to European art theories. While I could only offer anecdotal evidence of the continuity and ubiquity of practice of visual imitation in non-European pre-industrial cultures, I have the feeling, just the hunch, that the different modes of adoption and use of AI for image making in non-Western design cultures could be related to the stronger legacy of theories of collaborative making and anonymous authorship in non-European artistic tradition. I can only flag this matter so it may hopefully be taken over and investigated by others more competent than I am on, all the part of history and the geographies of history that I never studied. Pending this investigation, we may nevertheless safely assume that some form of imitation is the almost inevitable component of all creative processes, regardless of time, regardless of place, regardless of culture. And as technology now is about to automate imitation, and as technology today endorses, legitimizes, generalizes the practice of imitation in the arts, we urgently need to revive some degree of critical awareness of what imitation means, how it works, and how we can deal with it. Let me give you a handful of examples to conclude and to back up my claim. Example number one. The general press has given vast visibility to a number of claims by artists and other copyright holders, all taking a stance against AI-driven image processing tools. But there is a difference between companies like Getty Images, for example, which is suing an AI company for illegal appropriation of their copyrighted images, and class action by artists against the technical logic of generative AI in general. Getty Images, a big company and a very wealthy one, is probably right to assert its copyright on the images it owns and on the related metadata, the labels that allow large language models to match text and images. Those metadata in particular, that's work. It's money, it's value. Third parties that want to use that information, that data, in this instance to train generative AI models, they should have to buy and pay. But artists that complain that generative AI allows other artists to imitate their work, because this is what they're claiming, they show a basic ignorance of the nature of imitation in the arts. Never mind if the imitating agent is a human or a machine. All visual artists create based on stuff they have seen and liked. This is the way the human mind works. This is why we go to museums or we open Instagram to see art. Visual art is made to be seen. And when we see stuff we like, we are inspired by it. And this inspiration inevitably drives our own work. A photocopy is in most cases a form of plagiarism, but creative imitation is in most cases just the way human creativity always worked. You can copyright an image you have made and extract value from its identical reproduction, and this value will be paid in royalties or fees. But you cannot copyright your style because there is no way to itemize it, at least not in legally enforceable, quantifiable terms. Example number 2. The office of Kopp Immelblau in Vienna has recently published an excellent article showcasing a sophisticated style gun developed in-house by their technical team. This gun system is being trained exclusively on the archive of the most representative architectural project of the office itself. This way, the program will learn the peculiar architectural style of Kopp Immelblau, and when the training is completed, the system will replicate that style on demand, indefinitely, and in theory, forever. We must praise Kopp Immelblau for intellectual clarity of the project. As an architectural historian, I am aware that Kopp Immelblau has always had a very distinctive style, a unique, a signature style, I would say, and I am happy that this technology will now facilitate a critical discussion on the nature of that style. And I can see many ways to use this program in many professional contexts. Yet the idea that someone may want to borrow someone else's intelligence, never mind if artificial, to automatically imitate his own style strikes me as somewhat perverse and even a bit dumb. Example number 3. A quite different example of how automated imitation could become a crucial tool for discovery and innovation comes from structural engineering. Dragonfly wings are a natural example of a very efficient use of building materials. Nature has developed that structure through a heuristic process of random variation and natural selection that evolved over many billion years, and it's still ongoing. But now computation can take over from what nature has done till now and anticipate further improvement by running massive randomized variation starting from current samples of dragonfly wings. As we cannot optimize the structure of a dragonfly wing using traditional analytical tools because we cannot convert it into a structural formula, so we cannot find a maximum or a minimum, the researchers here have first generated a consistent data set of simulated variations, then use generative AI to imitate that structure while adapting it to different geometries and boundaries. For example, those of an airplane wing. This is an instance of a promising field of transfer learning or imitation learning, learning by demonstration, or from example, which basically means automated learning from observation. In this case, automated imitation may help us design structures we could not otherwise either calculate or optimize. What does that mean? That there are cases where we cannot calculate, and yet we can imitate. Once again, is this not something a smart artisan in the past would have done? Before the invention of modern structural engineering and analytic calculation, generative AI is here suggesting the possibility of a new kind of science, but one which is in fact the automated technical upgrade of a very old, indeed ancestral and all too human way of making. And this is my last word for today. Sorry, it was a bit long. So let's close the screen. Stop share. There you go.
Okay, fantastic.
Can you wait a minute? Because 1 minute ago, someone was ringing at my bell. Let me check, but it is not the fire, but the police or something.
Yeah, no problem. 所以同学们有什么问题，可以在问答里面用英文提问一下啊。
No, everything is okay. The house is not burning, so I can come back. Yeah.
That's great, great. I think it's a fantastic, impressive lecture. Actually, it's really deep to address the AI into the history of architecture.
Very long history.
Yeah. I think it's fantastic. That's the question I put forward to Anthony Picon last night, because how shall we address the right now situation, including the artificial intelligence, which influence so much in not only architecture discipline, but also art and all kinds of generative design into the history of human beings. So I think probably today, Carpo, I think the historian and theorist, he actually gave a very deep research and manifesto. Actually, this is the new humanism of artificial intelligence. I think it's kind of a theory which should be very important. So I strongly want you to publish this lecture in architecture intelligence. I think it's super super connecting to our topic. I think it's super good, because I think we need some theory right now. You put forward imitation as a kind of behavior of kind of notion from the historical perspective, to assembling from the elements and from the proportion and from different linguistic ways into the history by style. And also, I think imitation from drawings, Renaissance time, you mentioned from the drawings to actually different time in the history about the architecture style, which so much relate to the imitation. But I think we can still remember, like 20 years ago, after when the postmodernism ending, actually a lot of discussion, critical paper ethics, and they actually make a lot of defense or a lot of I think argument in such kind of stylistic assemblage of images. I think postmodernism is kind of resistant to modernism, which actually reassemble the architecture by a linguistic way, by some different elements and different components. Actually is not from the modern time, but go back to the history, and to assemble them into the logical production process of modernism. I think it's kind of critical to the modernism. But right now, I want to ask you the first question. If AI is a kind of new imitation, a new stylistic design from a lecture, my impression, what is this critical time we try to resistance? Maybe it's kind of logical or rational design process was totally by the industrialization in architecture discipline, by the different elements of architecture, like Rem Koolhaas, who curate Venice Biennale by the elements of architecture, it goes to, I think, the peak, the special time of the situation. In the industrialization is so distributed around the world, so it's kind of assemblage of such kind of elements in modern time. So is that AI a kind of a new critical age, which pointing to what history of architecture? So could you a little bit in the historian perspective to analyze the situation of AI in architecture right now? How will you address this new humanism into the history? So could you special answer?
Good question. But first, you said something very briefly, but on which I have a strong point of agreement with what you just mentioned. When you went back to postmodernism, and yes, postmodernism taking a stance against the elimination of history, which modernism had implemented, revived the importance of tradition and the reference to precedent. They brought history back into the design process. Yes, they did, but this is the paradox, which nobody mentioned at the time. They used history, which a modernist would not have done. They use history in a modernist way. So the way they put history together is by collage, cut and paste, and mechanical assembly, citation. So collage and cut and paste is modernism. This is the modernism. This is what a machine does. Put pieces together like the assembly line. And the postmodern wanted to go back to history, good, but the only way they could revive history was by putting historical pieces together as if they were using a mechanical assembly line. So it was history made in a factory, in a sense, or made in an industrial mode. Collage, cut and paste, citation. It was a modernist way to reevaluate historical tradition. Modernism didn't want historical tradition, so they brought it back. But the methodology whereby they used history was still modernist. This is the paradox, which is why modernism was a wacky failure in a sense, because they tried, but they didn't have the technology to do anything about it. Now, today, what AI oddly is doing is that it is bringing back history, not in a mechanical way, but in a human way or in a humanistic way. When a data set make a transformation of 25,000 models, it doesn't do that by cut and paste. It does that by merger, fusion, transfiguration, transformation. It's smooth, it's synthetic. This is what the human mind typically does. Collage and cut and paste is an accident. It became important with modernism because modernists were obsessed with this, mechanical approach. But in the classical tradition, in the tradition of, I would say, of all places and of all times around the world, the way the human mind imitation is not by putting pieces together, as in a collage, is by observing, reasoning, absorbing, digesting, and recreating. Something which is somewhat similar to our sources, but doesn't reuse and quote. There is no quotation, there is no citation, there is transformation, assimilation, digestion, and recreation. So paradoxically, it is the machine today which is bringing us back to what humans always did. Modernism separated us from humans, and artificial intelligence is more human than the mechanical technologies of the 20th century. And this is a general pattern which I've been advocating in many aspects of today's digital technologies. The digital is not a continuation of the machine age, it is a reversal of the machine age. The digital is in many ways the reversal of the Industrial Revolution. Yes, it is more technology, but it is technology of which the technical logic is the reversal of that which was underpinning industrial modernity. Standardization, mass production, economy of scale. Now, with the digital, all that is put into reverse. we can go, which is why digital craft is so important, which is why the digital is is teaching us again to think in an artisanal, not in an industrial way. This is true of the way we produce. This is equally way of the way we manipulate images. This is what artificial intelligence is now doing, and it confirms what we always suspected. But digital technologies are not mechanical to the power of 10. It is the elimination of the mechanical through technical change. So the artificial intelligence is closer to human intelligence than the mechanical assembly line was. This is, the general, the bigger picture. Now, so far so good. Second part of your question, assuming that now artificial intelligence can learn, can help us to deal with imitation in the way we always did, because this is the way artificial intelligence works, by assimilation, digestion, transformation, creative imitation. Do we really need that for architectural design? Because that's a different question. Because when the modernists claimed that the imitation of the style of the past is a very wasteful way of building, they had a point. And I still think that in most cases, when architects, designers become nostalgic of the past, this is not a good sign. It may even be a somewhat dangerous slippery slope, because if you are so attached to the style of the past, it becomes ideological, it becomes symbolic, it may become nationalistic, it may become about building borders, it may become nasty. And we have seen that in the recent past. So we have to be careful, because the new capacity we have to deal with architectural imitation in traditional humanistic way, never mind that it is facilitated by artificial intelligence, shouldn't, and this is a risk which I feel in the air, this shouldn't bring back a regurgitation of architectural historicism, because it has already happened many times. And we know that it is still a very wasteful way of building. We don't need to imitate the past to solve today's problem. But if we consider the way imitation learning works, it is a general principle which is not only applied to architectural styles. The example I mentioned of the dragonfly wing, the same principle of imitation learning is applied to structural engineering. And it is a very advanced, intelligent way to be efficient in structural design. There are things we cannot calculate because it is beyond our analytic tools. But then when we cannot imitate, we cannot calculate analytically, today we can do what engineers of 50 years ago couldn't do. We can use artificial intelligence to automate variation by imitation until we find one of these variations which happens to work. It's the normal process of random variation, selection of the fittest. It may be, it just might be, and I have to, contextualize my statement because I'm not a structural engineer, but I have a feeling that there are problems we can solve with that methodology, which we could not solve in any other way. And the same for many architectural problems of distribution, of plans, of layout, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, technical problems, actual quantitative problems where money is at stake, energy efficiency, carbon footprint, functionality. In all these areas where optimization is a goal, it is possible that the principle of imitation may be a valid alternative to analytic calculation. So the fact that we can again imitate doesn't mean that we should imitate, Greek architecture or Gothic architecture or whatever. It means that we can use the principle of imitation to solve even engineering problems, or design problems, technical design problems, which we could not solve in any. It's a general paradigm shift. It's a way of solving problems. Now, architects are often obsessed with stylistic problems. That's our problem. But it's a general problem-solving device, which we can use to solve important problems, and we can waste our time to solve, stupid problems. No. Intelligent people will solve intelligent problems, and dumb people will waste their time solving stupid problems. But the tool is what counts. And as always, artificial intelligence is a tool. It can only be as intelligent as the task to which we put it. If we put this tool to an intelligent task, we can do something good. Of course, there will always be, dumb people who use smart tools to solve problems that do not exist. But what can we do? That was always that way. So the risk here is that this regurgitation of imitation and style may bring back, and it is happening, and I feel it will happen, a revival of stupid historicism. It's going to happen because it's very easy to do, and it's a video game, and we shall see some of that. But let's not waste our time with that crap. What we can do with this tool, it can become an extremely valuable general problem-solving device. This is where I think we should focus.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think it's more like a manifesto about the new humanism. Actually, you still use human to analyze the artificial intelligence. It seems to artificial intelligence is real connecting or with human being. I think it's kind of you mentioned the latent space, a kind of new consciousness actually from the memory of the human artifacts and human civilization, which is stored on the internet. Actually, AI can produce a certain kind of new creativity, and you use creative imitation. I think it's kind of a new definition of the initial logic, actually, which goes into the new humanism.
Creative imitation is a term which was current in the 16th century. Mm-hmm. So yeah. we were, but again, in the 16th century, when the humanists in the Renaissance talk about creative imitation, it was not just about imitating the style of Cicero. For them, there was even a very practical, how can I say, a realistic, the idea of reviving a civilization which had been dead for 15th century. Mm-hmm. It may look like, the most stupid idea in the world. But put yourself in the shoes of someone living in Europe in the 15th century. They knew that the ancient civilization of Greek and Rome was so much superior to the current way of living in all aspects of science, technology, philosophy, politics, etc., etc. They could look at the ruins of classical antiquity and said, how could they build this stuff? We do not know how to do that anymore. In every field, they were confronted with the permanent visualization of an old civilization which was so much better than the world in which they lived. And so for them, reviving the past was a way of going forward, because they could think that so much had already been discovered by the Greek and the Roman and then lost. If you were a medical doctor in the 15th century, you didn't do experiments, because they said, well, the Greek and the Roman were so good in medicine that if something could be discovered, they already found it. And so for them, studying the classical text of medical doctors of the Greek and Roman age was a way of leaping forward in science and technology. And for a while, it was in fact the right thing to do. Then at some point, they got on a par, they managed to catch up. And then they said, well, should we keep imitating those old guys? Now we can do better than them. And so, but at the beginning, I think it was a very good idea, because it was a shortcut to the future. Reviving the past was a way of relearning in one generation or two what 15 generations of Middle Ages, etc., had abandoned. So the science fiction of the 15th century was archaeology. If you wanted to look at the future, you had to dig, and you found the future underground, because it had already been there 15 centuries before. So at the beginning, it was not such a wacky idea as it would seem today. For them, imitating the past was a way of imagining the future, because for them, that future had already happened.
Great.
But today we are in a different way. I don't think we can learn much from the Greek and the Roman. Our engineering is better. Our medical, they didn't have vaccination. They had nothing. We can do better than them. We already are.
It's a wonderful idea to actually to reading back to the imitation. I think it's great relevance to analyze the future actually based on the artificial intelligence. So we have a lot of question in the discussion, question Q&A, and right. If you like to ask a question by yourself, it's wonderful by some of students. Liu Mengxun, would you like to ask a question? I give you the right for you to ask a question. Liu Mengxun, are you here?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you, but cannot see you.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to over my camera.
Never mind. So long as I can hear you, I can answer.
Okay, so Professor, so what do you think that the artificial intelligence will develop in the future? Will it develop in a more like technology way, or maybe more humanity in it? So, and my second question is, will it replace the work of architects or researchers? So we can see a lot of essays or maybe the renderings joined by the artificial intelligence. So what do you think of them?
Yeah, of course. Every time we talk about artificial intelligence, there is always someone saying, it's going to take my job. But this is true of any technology. Imagine if you were a typewriter, not a typist in the 50s, and then a photocopy machine was invented, and you say, am I losing my job? Yes. If you were a typist before the invention of the photocopy machine, when the photocopy machine came, you lost your job. But, you know, the way technological change happens in society, economies adopt a new technology only when the destruction of wealth, which the new technology brings about, is more than compensated by the new wealth that the new technology is going to create. So imagine that you are a typist, you know, all the skyscrapers of New York in the 50s, imagine all these floors were inhabited by mostly young ladies whose job was to type on the typewriter, because the only way to make a copy at the time was the carbon copy. We didn't have any photocopy machine. So if you needed more than 10 copies of a document, you had to type it and type it and type it again, which means that there were many jobs of people who did just that. They were typing all day. And then the photocopy machine came, and they realized that they didn't need many typists anymore. And so all those girls, 90% of them lost their job. And today, the occupation of a typist, which was a very common occupation in most of the world, particularly for young women before, you know, they get married, or that profession has disappeared. But when this happens, it is because in the general scheme of things, new jobs come onto the market, which are probably better and better paid than the old jobs that are being destroyed. This is not always the case. And what is true in the general scheme of things may not be good when seen from the position of someone who actually lost their job. Because someone else will be trained to do another job, but it may not be the same person. So there will be some people who will actually lose their job. This always happens. Meaning people who knew how to sail a boat, you know, sailing boats for international commerce, sailors, most of them lost their jobs when steamboats came. But I mean, we are not using sailing boats anymore. And so this is the way technical change. Now, for what preoccupies architects in particular, I would not be particularly worried right now, because the kind of stuff we do is so eccentric, so peculiar, so unique, so unpredictable, that it does require, in most cases, in all cases, I would say, the quirkiness of human inventivity. Now, we have more and more tools at our disposal. So probably some of the lower levels of the architectural professions will be affected by the arrival of new technologies. This always happened. But the inventive role of the architect, his capacity to invent solutions that no machine can produce by its own, because they go beyond pure optimization. This, it's not something that would preoccupy, certainly not my generation, we are old, but not even your generation. You are not going to be replaced. If you are a real architect, a real designer, a thinking mind, no machine is going to take your job. Now, if I were in some other professions, I would be worried. Think that you are a structural engineer, for example, not an intelligent structural, a genius, a brilliant guy, but someone who does, common standard calculation of banal optimization of standard engineering problems. These jobs are gone because a machine can do that cheaper, faster, and better than any human being. So if your job that you do is, pure quantitative optimization, that is what a machine will do better than you. So if you are an engineer working in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, or even a low-level structural engineer, then you should worry, because this is the kind of jobs that artificial intelligence is going to take over. For what we do, for the wacky kind of things we do, unpredictable, random, eccentric, sometimes pretty bizarre, no machine would do that, because machines are reasonable. Architects, as you know, most of the time they're just nuts. So no machine is going to replace that. Don't worry. Just be good at your job, and no machine is going to take your job.
Great answer. Thank you. And I will have the next question goes to Qi Jiaqi. I think you have a good question would like to ask by yourself.
Hi, Professor. My question is, would you consider it to be homogeneous by imitation, or to say where is the boundary between those two concepts? Because the modernism in a lot of buildings, current building are impacted by the modernism, and they look similar to each other. So I'm wondering, what's the imitation gonna take us in the future?
Well, that's the general problem of what is the style that you're trying to imitate. Because imagine that you want to imitate Mies van der Rohe. Now, Mies van der Rohe basically made the same building all his life. So there is no imitation in his case. It was the pure mentality of the modern industrial age. Mind you, I like Mies van der Rohe a lot. I lived in a Mies van der Rohe building for a while in my life. It was a great experience. I was never as happy as I was when I lived in a Mies van der Rohe building. But that was the spirit of the 20th century. Identical replication, mass production, standardization, economies of scale. There is no imitation. Mies van der Rohe was not imitating himself. He was just making the same stuff from the first to the last day of his life, with minor variation due to the fact that new materials and new technology occasionally showed up, and so he intelligently found a way to exploit them, but basically he kept doing the same thing all his life. No imitation. It was one simple problem applied all his life. But I mean, this is the case of Mies, who was, in a sense, a madman and a genius. Le Corbusier, same generation, same spirit, but Le Corbusier changed his style at least 3 times during his life. There is Le Corbusier of the 20s, which is different from Le Corbusier of the 40s, which is different from Le Corbusier of the 50s and early 60s. So in that case, you could extract, if you like, the style of Le Corbusier 1, the style of Le Corbusier 2, and the style of Le Corbusier 3. And in that case, if you are, if you want to play that game, at some point, not exactly today's technology, but soon technology will be able, if you create a consistent data set based on your project, what you have in mind, may suggest solutions of how to imitate a certain aspect of the style of Le Corbusier. But honestly, if you are an architect, why on earth would you want to do that? Now, as we were saying before, using this tool to just replicate the style of someone else seems to me to be a very stupid way of using this technology. This is a general problem-solving technology, which solves problems by creative imitation. You can use this technology to imitate the style of Le Corbusier or of Rem Koolhaas, if you like. But if you are a good architect, you will never want to do that. Now, take the example I mentioned of the office of Kopp Immelblau, meaning Wolf Prix. They created an entire data set, which, if you think of it, is meant to allow that office to keep designing in the style of Wolf Prix forever, even 50 years after Wolf Prix is dead. This seems absurd and a bit stupid, and it probably is, but think of another practical application of that data set once it has been created. Someone comes to your office and say, you are Kopp Immelblau. I like the stuff you do, and I want you to do something for me, which is what you generally do. Now, if you are a client, in that case, what do you have in mind? What do you like of the office of Kopp Immelblau? Well, the term which nobody would use, but probably now people will start using again, is that if you go to see the office of Kopp Immelblau and not the office of Alejandro Zera Polo, for example, whom you saw a few days ago, or the office of Rem Koolhaas, it is because you like something which is consistent in the production of that office. And what would that be? Well, it is probably the style of that office. The fact that that office has a certain aura, and when you see that building, you say, that is a Kopp Immelblau building. Why? Because there is a consistency over time, even if there is a certain variation from one period to another, material and places, etc. But you can tell there is the style of Wolf Prix, who created that office and who is still the driving force behind it. So imagine you go and see that office and see, you're the client. Say, I came to your office, you're the architect. Why did you come to see us? Say, well, because I like the stuff you do. Then you, the architect, ask, what precisely do you like in what we do? Do we like the foundations? Do you like the door handle? Do you like the restrooms we build or the roof? No, I like the general way your buildings look. Aha. Then you like our style. Yeah, okay. Tell us, what do you have in mind? You need to build, 12 floors residential building, but okay, come here. We have a machine that will give you an idea on the spot in 2 seconds of the kind of stuff we would do for that problem in the style of our office. Tuk, 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 tuk. Your gun produces on the screen in 1 minute 150 variations of stuff in the style of your office that suits the specific program of your client. This is the beginning. The client says, oh, I like that. This is exactly what I want. I say, of course, this is the style of what we do. Now, if we agree on that, let's forget about this crap. Let's have a serious discussion. Let's come in the other room and let's speak with a team of designers and let's take it to another level. But in this sense, as a marketing tool, this apparently, perverse game may actually have some practical use as a marketing tool, not as a design tool. Design is a more serious thing, I would say. But there is something to be said. And, Kopp Immelblau, they published it, but I know several other offices were doing right now exactly the same thing. They don't say it. At least Kopp Immelblau said, we are doing it, see it. So they're being more transparent. But everyone is doing that.
Good. I think it's a critical point when we have AI, how to define the authorship, how to define the creativity. I think question goes with that very well. And we have another question actually is also related to
I cannot hear. Still no voice.
So maybe I lost my voice. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah. Let's go to the next question, who's answered Iceberg, who is asking if an artist start to use AI to regenerate his own work. So the artists start to draw the new drawings based on his work and the generative tools. So how do we define the artist's work? Does this generate a new category of art creation? So that's a question related to the authorship for the future.
I missed the first part of the question. Can you repeat it? I don't understand what the artist is doing.
Artist start using means, but he actually, based on his formal artwork, and use the new AI to create something new based on his original.
On his own work. Well, I have friends and common friends, you know, our common friend Matthias del Campo has been telling me this story for a long time. He created a data set of his own drawings.
Okay.
He put a data set, all the drawings he made in the last 15 years. I don't know how many were, made a data set. And then uses the machine to say, now, style gun, create a new drawing in my own style. And the machine will, you know, it's imitation, creative imitation. It's a variation which stays within the limits of something which will appear similar to what is in the data set, which is what you always did. Now, it may be a video game. It may be funny for you to see what you would do if you wanted to imitate yourself. The machine will tell you, if you want to imitate what you always did, do that. But, you know, I'm not a designer, I'm mostly a writer. I wouldn't want to write again what I already wrote. So as a designer, I would not be happy at always imitating myself. Again, there is a different game because you may want to keep your style and to push your variations within that style to the maximum ambit of possible recognition. So as in the case of the dogs, you create a data set of the dogs, you have a latent space of the dog, and then you create fake dogs. How much variation you can put into that fake dog, there is up to a certain point, you will say, it's still a dog. And then beyond a certain point, you say, this is no longer a dog. This is something else. I don't know what it is. It looks like it's a monster or something. So there is this border, which is the borderline between the style, which is specific to the data set, and something else. This is the border of creativity. But, you know, there are also artists that one day they wake up and they do something which is completely different from what they have been doing all their life. This is what the machine will never do. So I think that it may be an interesting dialogue for an artist who want to explore the frontier, the borderline of her own creativity. It's a tool, like looking at yourself in a mirror. It can be used intelligently, but it's, again, it's a tool. It's like looking at all the drawings you made, including those you forget you ever made. And the machine will do that. You may have forgotten, but they are in the machine will not forget. It's a way of reassessing your creation and deciding to what extent you want to keep within the border of your own style. This, I never tried it. You know, you should ask Matthias. Matthias has been playing this game for some time now. I tried it with ChatGPT, but I don't want to imitate my own style in writing. So, but I can see that this can be an interesting tool for the self-analysis of an artist or a creator. It's a tool. It's a tool, but in some cases, like looking at yourself in a mirror may help you to have some ideas. But I mean, it's not a magic wand. It will not change that much in the spirit of what we call creative imitation.
Great. I think it's a good answer. That depends on if the artist would like to imitate himself. That's
or not. If you want to keep doing the same thing all over, but then why would you want to do it? Let the machine do it, and then you go and play tennis all day long.
And we have another question. Zhang Guipei, would you like to ask by yourself? Zhang Guipei. Are you here?
I cannot hear.
Zhang Guipei. Yes.
Someone has raised the hand.
Yeah, I actually gave you the right. Zhang Guipei, you can ask question. We cannot hear you actually. Maybe your microphone have some problem. So I will help him ask questions because he already put it in the Q&A session. Good evening, Professor. When I asked ChatGPT about how we should creative roles responding to the current trend of AI art imitation, ChatGPT answer, responding to the trend of AI art imitation requires embracing collaboration, encouraging innovation, preserving human creativity, and critically reflecting on the implications and exploring the transformative potential of AI in the artistic realm. By doing so, we can navigate the evolving landscape and shape the future of art in conjunction with artificial intelligence. So I wish to ask you the same question to Professor. So the question is, I will ask again. Shall we, the creative roles, respond to the current trend of AI art imitation? Is that the answer?
Well, in the question, there was this reference to ChatGPT and large language models. Let's bear in mind, as I said, that there is a significant difference between the creative use of large language models and the creative use of specific custom-made data sets. If you use ChatGPT or DALL-E or Midjourney, you are making an opinion poll, which is based on what is out there on the internet. It's the wisdom of crowds. If you are, as I said, an advertising manager, and you want to know what is in the mind of most people concerning this idea, it's an interesting tool. Even ChatGPT will give you an answer which is based on the aggregation, based on frequencies and probabilities of what is most likely to be said by most people about the question you have been asking. It is an opinion poll. It is an average of the wisdom of crowd. If you are a designer, what do you do with that? Nothing. It is not a design tool. It's a marketing tool, possibly, or a sociological tool, or something for politicians, or people who want to sell something, or people who want to be elected. But for designers, that has no role whatsoever. What designers should use, and are in fact using, is you create your own data set. You choose the images which are pertinent to your project. For each project, you create one data set. This data set creates the latent space, which is the beacon whereby all the variation will be recreated, because every imitation will be mapped to the latent space, which is created by the data set you have constituted. So the tool of your creativity becomes the constitution of your data set. Based on the data set you create, the latent space will have a certain vectorial formula, which will determine the variation it will apply to every prompt you put into the system. This is where your unique creativity goes if you want to use this model. It's the data set you create, not the prompt you put into the machine. If you depend on a generic data set, you don't create anything, you just interrogate the wisdom of crowds. So these are two completely different strategies. Large language models, not for us. Specific data set, that's what is of some design relevance. So let's keep, two different strategies.
I think you mentioned actually two, I think one is data set, how you select the data set, and the answer will relate strongly with the data set. And secondly is the algorithm. Actually, LoRa is kind of not a big model, but maybe some small model we should train certain questions. So I think that's a good answer. And I think
making your own data set. In fact, every project should have its data set. It's the way you create a data set which becomes your project in a sense.
Yeah, okay. I think because of time, we'll have two more questions. We have a lot of questions actually, but we want to select them. Stella, would you like to ask? Stella Shen, would you like to by yourself?
Yeah. Hi. Yeah, you guys can hear me, right?
Yes, I do.
Cool. Thank you, Professor Carpo. It's like really great to to hear you talk about all these, and I think it's a critical moment for us to really give some deep thoughts regarding how we can leverage technologies as designers. So my initial question, I think, sort of has been already answered, because there are so many people, like at least in my circle, they're like leveraging machine learning or AI to create art. I was just curious about the way how we can use those in a sense-making way. But I think you touched this point in your previous answers, to other questions. So yeah, I just want to say thank you then.
Well, thank you. By the way, your English is better than mine. Did you live in America?
Yeah, I'm actually in Pittsburgh right now. I'm a student from Carnegie Mellon University. Yeah.
Where are you?
Carnegie Mellon University.
Oh yeah, that's a very good place to be. Congratulations.
Yeah, because there's so many because it's famous for its computer science. So there are so many people who studying computer science and are interested in AI and machine learning here. Every single student within the school, I would say they try to use those technology in a way, but as a student from School of Art or School of Architecture, we're always struggling to differentiate the way how we use those technologies from computer scientists, right? But then all of a sudden everyone say, oh, now we have Midjourney, I can be a designer now. We no longer need designers, and then they think design is an easy thing. So I was thinking it's just very, very hard for design students or architecture students to convince other people, okay, actually that's not design, design is too much deeper. Yeah, but anyway.
But yeah, just to mention, because I had a similar discussion with computer scientists just a few days ago. They are also experimenting with knowledge transfer, just as we are experimenting with style transfer. And they are coming to the conclusion that imitation may be a way to solve otherwise unmanageable problem-solving situations. So they're realizing that by imitation learning and knowledge transfer, they can have access to a new, unprecedented, almost a new scientific paradigm. And I have to tell them, in design, we have been doing that for a few years. And we can tell you, perhaps before you find out what's going to happen, because if we do imitation in the visual arts, what we do, it shows. It immediately shows up. You can tell at a glance what's going on. So we can tell you, due to the fact that what we do is visual, what you will probably find out only in a few years, because we started doing that before you did, and our experiments are immediately visible. Because if we do visual imitation, you can tell at a glance what's going on, whereas they are doing imitation learning, and I have a feeling that we are more alert to what's going on than they are, because what we do shows, and what they are doing, they only just started to try to do it, it doesn't show that much. So this is a fertile ground for collaboration, because they know the technology better than we do. But we have an early representation of what is going to happen due to the fact that we deal with visual phenomena. We should build a common research project with them, because they know stuff we don't know, and we see stuff they don't see.
Yeah, thank you. I really like the way how you think of those, collaborations that should be happening. And I think that is a very kind of positive kind of perspective. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Last but not least, we want to invite Liuran. Would you like to ask the final question?
Hello. Well, my question was also somewhat answered previously. So initially, I was wondering about the core difference between, imitations based on this statistically collective intuition that is expressed mathematically, and the imitations based on individual affinities. But actually what I understood is that making your own data set is superior to using a generic data set, and that, well, it seems from that the design can only be really made and expressed through an individual affinity. But we know of examples of collaborations of people with different affinities working together to make one project. So isn't this generic data set being used a sort of extrapolation of that is perhaps still a bit senseless because it's not fine-tuned? But could we imagine a scenario in which mathematics can create this large-scale collaboration?
Well, you already, in a sense, answered your own excellent query, because a data set is a set. And as we learned in set theory, you determine the extension of the set. So large language models, by the way they are defined, they aim at creating the largest available possible amalgamation and merger of the wisdom of crowds. So the more data they have, the better they work for what they are meant to do. Aggregating, visualizing, representing, averaging, synthesizing the wisdom of crowd, an opinion poll. And by the way they work, they are generic and generalist. The opposite case is our friend Matthias del Campo, who made his own data set. The drawings he himself and nobody else made in the last 15 years. So he asked the machine, what would I do if I want to do what I have always been doing? But there are infinite nuances of extension between these two extremes. You may want to create a data set which applies to your college, a data set which applies to your town, or a data set which applies to your country, or the data set which applies to the people who drink only Coca-Cola. So this is the extension of the data set is determined by your project and determines your project. You know, the proverb, garbage in, garbage out, but if you put good stuff in, you will get the good stuff you need. So the strategic choice which we have to make to use these tools is the extension of the data set, and the most creative operation in the entire workflow is the constitution of the data set, because you may try to tweak the reply of the system by keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking the prompts. Yes, most people are doing that, but still you will not get what you're looking for. The only way to get something which is relevant to your project is that your project determines your data set. At least based on today's technology, that's the only way it may make sense to a design profession. If you are a marketing specialist, a politician, or someone who sells something, who wants to get votes, that's another story. That's what they do, but this is not what we do. Well, there are cases where an opinion poll is interest for architects as well. But again, that's marketing, not design.
Good.
Thank you.
It's an interesting, very interesting discussion session, followed by Professor Mario's lecture. I think it's a great discussion because I totally agree. I think this data set is most important, and the quantity and the quality of data sets also matters the result. So that's why right now the training set and the training algorithm is both important to the designers, because not just one choose Midjourney or DALL-E, we should try to develop our own design process and our own data set and algorithm to create a new authorship by the collaboration between the computer, AI, and the human being. So I'm very happy to from this lecture, because Carpo still would like to address AI into the humanism. I think it's not a humanized process. It's kind of rehumanized. I think
it's not post-human. It's almost new human.
I think it's the main idea from Professor Carpo's lecture. I think it's really impressive. And also, I think it should be a very important manifesto. Actually, it's so theorized. It's very accurately quoting a lot of the creative imitation from the history and bridging the past history to the future. I think that's what a historian should do, and remind us to rethinking on the new technology. How shall we address our discipline in the long history? I think thanks a lot for the.
Oh, thank you all guys for the questions. Good questions. Excellent discussion. Thank you, Philip, for the introduction and the invitation. And to be continued. Now I shall go and have lunch, and I guess you have dinner, right?
Exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and to be continued. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.